Welcome to the Clarin Horatio Daily World Brief, available at clarinhoratio.com. Today is August 2, 2026, and we are looking at a stack of sources that reveal a world where the old, centralized ways of doing things are basically failing. We're seeing new, highly localized strategies take over, but we have to start with a massive geopolitical standoff in the Middle East that just had its brakes slammed on.
Right. U.S. President Donald Trump abruptly canceled a major planned military strike on Iranian energy infrastructure, and he cited requests from regional neighbors, plus the potential for what he called a rapid diplomatic deal.
But mechanically, halting an operation of that scale at the 11th hour is, well, it's like slamming the brakes on a fully loaded freight train mere seconds before a head-on collision. The crash is averted for now, but the sheer momentum of all those mobilized military and logistical assets is still pushing forward. You can almost see the smoke pouring off the wheels.
And you can feel the heat from that friction immediately in daily life, because the underlying tension hasn't gone anywhere. Houthi and Iranian attacks have severely choked off commercial transit through the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping companies are forced to reroute their entire fleets around the continent of Africa to avoid getting hit by anti-ship missiles.
Which extends transit times by weeks.
Yeah.
And that directly hits the energy markets, doesn't it?
Exactly. We are seeing Brent crude oil surge past $100 a barrel as a direct result of that choked-off transit. So when you pull up to the gas pump later this week and see those prices spiking, this state-level standoff in the Middle East is the exact mechanical reason why.
And when energy costs rise that sharply, everyday household costs for groceries and basic goods just follow suit almost immediately. That fuels a surge in inflation that is going to severely limit the economic choices available to governments in the months ahead.
It traps central banks, too. They were hoping to lower interest rates to provide some relief to consumers, and now they basically can't. But, this entire state-level standoff operates on massive, highly visible displays of traditional military power, which is fascinating when you compare it to a fundamentally different, highly decentralized frontline shifting right now in Eastern Europe.
The war in Ukraine has dramatically moved from the trenches on the earth straight to the sky. Based on the tactical assessments we're reviewing, Ukraine has developed a new, highly coordinated drone strategy that pushes the conflict deep into Russian territory.
They are completely bypassing the frontline stalemate.
Right. We're talking about confirmed strikes on oil refineries 1,600 kilometers into the Russian Republic of Bashkortostan. Plus, there's this coordinated switch-off campaign targeting electricity nodes in occupied Crimea. Local residents are literally queuing in the streets for hot meals cooked in massive vats because the power grid is failing entirely.
And they're even running calculated strikes on massive distribution warehouses belonging to Wildberries, which basically operates as Russia's equivalent of Amazon. The mechanics of these strikes reveal a massive vulnerability in traditional state defense.
Because Russia's air defense systems, like the S-400, are primarily engineered to detect and intercept high-altitude supersonic fighter jets or ballistic missiles, right?
Exactly. They aren't built for this. Ukraine is building cheap, propeller-driven drones using composite materials that fly incredibly low to the ground. They literally fly under the radar horizon, navigating via pre-programmed GPS waypoints to completely avoid electronic jamming.
Which presents a really fascinating strategic irony. Historically, Russia's immense geographic size has been its greatest defense against invading armies. It stopped Napoleon, it stopped Hitler. But in a decentralized drone war, that exact same vastness has become their biggest vulnerability.
Because there is simply too much airspace to monitor. Russia cannot position expensive, sophisticated anti-aircraft batteries over every single oil refinery, warehouse, and power substation across 17 million square kilometers of territory.
And Ukraine's strategy has successfully exploited that vastness. They've knocked out over 300 Russian air defense systems. The Kremlin has actually been forced to pull vital defenses away from the active front lines just to protect the immediate airspace around Moscow and St. Petersburg.
And that inflicts direct socio-psychological pressure on ordinary Russian citizens. For years, the Kremlin justified the 2022 invasion by claiming it would keep Russia safe and, push the conflict away from their borders. By bringing the destruction directly to local infrastructure and e-commerce warehouses, Ukraine is systematically dismantling that core justification.
They are forcing Russian society to experience the daily disruptions of a war they previously managed to just ignore. And that same technological shift where cheap, decentralized tools bypass traditional state defenses is creating a terrifying new dynamic in Western Europe, too.
You're talking about the rise of violence as a service.
Yes. Authorities are dealing with transnational gangs, specifically the Foxtrot network, which actually has verified links to the Iranian regime. They're using social media to recruit teenagers across Europe to carry out assassinations.
It is incredibly grim.
Take the harrowing case of Johannes Natland. He is an 18-year-old Norwegian who was offered roughly $21,000 for a hit in the United Kingdom. He was guided entirely via the encrypted messaging app Signal by an operative calling himself Agent 47, literally mirroring the Hitman video game franchise.
And they don't even meet in person. This handler used GPS coordinates to lead Natlan to a cash stash and hidden guns that were just buried in the woods near Huddersfield. The grooming mechanics here are, well, they're incredibly sophisticated.
Because they're deliberately targeting vulnerable youth, right? Kids suffering from social isolation or severe mental health struggles.
Yes. By communicating exclusively through encrypted apps, they strip away all physical context and turn the assassination into something resembling a video game quest. The teenager never meets the handler, never sees the person paying for the hit, and is just fed a steady stream of instructions that completely dehumanizes the target. It gamifies the act of murder.
But looking at the operational logic of that, I have to ask a glaring question. If these networks are recruiting inexperienced, isolated teenagers with severe mental health issues, aren't the organizers worried about these kids panicking, making a mistake, and getting caught before the job is finished?
Getting caught is a calculated part of the business model. The Foxtrot network explicitly recruits these teenagers because they are viewed as entirely disposable. These youths lack any real understanding of the long-term consequences of international murder charges, and they're willing to take extreme risks for what is presented as quick, easy money.
So when the teenagers are inevitably arrested by local police, and they frequently are, the handler simply deletes the encrypted chat history on their end and disappears. The gang never actually has to pay the $21,000.
Exactly. The financial and legal risk to the actual organizers drops to zero.
That is a profound moral failure on the part of modern societies. We are basically allowing local social isolation and fractured community support systems to become a direct, open gateway for state-sponsored proxy violence. Vulnerable children are being weaponized by remote handlers thousands of miles away.
And that exploitation of disposable youth in Europe shares a grim operational logic with another group of exploited people currently caught in a ruthless, opaque justice system in the Middle East.
And before we get into the details of that system, for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarineration.com.
So, we are looking at Ethiopian migrants who are calling journalists from smuggled mobile phones while sitting on death row in Saudi Arabia. These are men fleeing the aftermath of the brutal civil war in the Tigray region, desperately looking for work to send money back to their families.
And the details from these smuggled calls are horrific. One man, identified as Haptum, explained how he and dozens of others were tricked by human smugglers. They were hired to carry sealed packages across the highly dangerous Yemeni border into Saudi Arabia under the assumption they were hauling food or basic supplies.
They only found out later they were actually hauling khat, which is a natural plant stimulant that is highly illegal in the kingdom. So far in 2026, 17 Ethiopians have been executed for drug offenses in Saudi Arabia.
The legal mechanics functioning behind these executions are built entirely on depriving the accused of basic human rights. I mean, the men describe being forced into mass trials where due process is non-existent. They're denied legal representation. Translation services are inadequate or completely absent.
Haptum actually described being physically forced to sign a written confession in Arabic, a language he cannot read or speak.
And he refuses to tell his family back home in Ethiopia that he is awaiting execution. He prefers they only find out after he's gone, rather than live with the daily agony of waiting. And the physical conditions are just as brutal. We have accounts of 200 men crammed into a cell designed for 90, sleeping on the bare floor under plastic garbage bags because there are no blankets.
We have to look at the broader geopolitical stakes driving this judicial machine. While regional governments issue formal diplomatic statements and negotiate potential royal amnesties for public relations purposes, these desperate migrants are actively being ground up by the system.
The courts view them not as humans seeking refuge from a war zone, but as expendable pawns. They're highly visible examples used to demonstrate a hardline stance to the domestic population regarding the kingdom's war on drugs.
And that failure of governance brings up a crucial question about how authorities manage massive crises and how corporate accountability plays into public survival. We can see a stark contrast by looking at two nations in East Africa handling the exact same public health threat.
Right, because as of August 2026, the Democratic Republic of Congo is battling the deadliest Ebola outbreak on record, with over 1,500 fatalities. Their public health response is severely hampered by active militant violence, which makes early surveillance and contact tracing nearly impossible.
But next door, Uganda faced the introduction of the exact same virus and successfully contained it to just 20 cases. The mechanical difference in their response is a masterclass in civic anticipation.
Uganda didn't wait for the outbreak to spread. They utilized rapid response teams that had been kept actively funded and trained since previous health crises. They immediately activated specialized treatment centers within 24 hours of the first detected case and aggressively quarantined over 6,000 potential contacts.
They used proactive governance to literally starve the virus of new hosts. Now, contrast that proactive governance with a different kind of global health crisis outlined in a recent warning from the World Health Organization.
This was shocking to read. The WHO reports that ultra-processed food, or UPF giants, have filed 235 lawsuits against sovereign governments around the world. These lawsuits are specifically targeting nations attempting to implement junk food taxes and health warning labels on packaging.
But if you look at the legal outcomes, the food corporations are actually losing 75% of these lawsuits.
Which makes you ask, why would massive multinational companies dedicate vast financial resources to suing governments if their own legal teams know they're highly likely to lose in court?
The strategy is a well-documented legal mechanism known as regulatory chill. The primary goal of these UPF giants isn't necessarily to win a verdict from a judge. The goal is to force governments into exhaustive, expensive, and incredibly slow legal battles.
So if you look at the cases tracked by the WHO, countries have been subjected to nearly 600 cumulative years of litigation. It operates a lot like a sports team that realizes they are completely outmatched and cannot win the game on skill, so they just constantly foul the opposing players.
That is an excellent way to picture it. They know they will get penalized, but the continuous fouling ruins the momentum, stops the clock, and drags the game out into an agonizing slog.
By filing for injunctions and demanding endless discovery periods, the corporations are deliberately freezing vital public health legislation in place. They keep their heavily processed products unrestricted and on the shelves while the global obesity crisis deepens.
The contrast in governance is sobering. You have Uganda saving thousands of lives through decisive, rapid intervention, while wealthier nations find their entire legislative process bogged down and paralyzed by corporate legal attrition.
And that struggle to implement public health policy brings us to the ultimate civic challenge testing governments today, managing a physical environment that is rapidly becoming hostile to human life.
The immediate climate reality this month is severe.
It is. Italy has placed 25 of its major cities on high alert red warnings for extreme heat, urging citizens to stay indoors just to avoid heat stroke. Massive, fast-moving wildfires have caused historic evacuations in France's Gironde region.
And in Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is taking an unusually blunt approach. He's publicly calling out right-wing politicians for treating the climate emergency as a mantra to hide behind, stating plainly that the climate emergency kills people and destroys the ecosystem.
We have definitively moved past the era of simply debating the existence of a climate crisis or relying on reactive disaster management. I mean, when 25 major cities are simultaneously on red alert, the defining test for modern governments is anticipation and adaptation.
It requires the civic will to completely re-engineer our physical infrastructure to handle extremes that the original designers never planned for.
And we are actually seeing concrete, localized adaptations taking root. For example, Australia is mitigating its highly destructive fire seasons by combining modern satellite data with 60,000-year-old indigenous cool fire-burning techniques.
Mechanically, this involves lighting deliberate, low-intensity fires during specific times of the day when humidity is higher. The fire creeps slowly along the ground, consuming dead leaves and underbrush, but it doesn't get hot enough to ignite the upper canopy of the trees.
So they are using ancient knowledge to safely clear vegetation and starve potential mega fires of fuel before the dry season even starts.
And we are seeing a similar pivot in how governments manage extreme drought and flooding. Places like California and parts of Germany are fundamentally re-engineering their approach to water infrastructure.
Right. Instead of using concrete channels to funnel storm floodwaters as quickly as possible into rivers and oceans, they are building massive targeted infiltration basins. These basins capture the floodwater and spread it over highly permeable soil, allowing it to slowly pump deep underground.
It essentially treats the Earth like a massive sponge. It replenishes depleted aquifers so the water is actually available for agricultural use during the next inevitable drought.
But it requires a profound amount of institutional humility to step back and admit that pouring more concrete isn't always the answer. These governments are realizing that integrating highly localized, ancient ecological knowledge, whether it is understanding the specific burn patterns of local flora or the absorption rates of regional soil, is absolutely essential to surviving modern climate extremes.
When you look across the developments we are tracking today, a very clear pattern emerges about resilience. From the massive state militaries unable to defend their own vast airspace against cheap drones, to wealthy nations paralyzed in court by junk food conglomerates, highly centralized systems are buckling. They are just too rigid to adapt quickly.
Which leaves you with a critical question to consider about your own future. As you face unprecedented environmental and social stressors over the next decade, from extreme climate shocks hitting your town to digital proxy violence infiltrating the phones in your neighborhood, your biggest vulnerability might not be a lack of advanced technology. It might be waiting for a massive, centralized authority to save you. The real test will be whether you can help build resilient, localized communities, and whether you are willing to embrace the local wisdom that kept humanity alive for millennia before the modern state ever existed. Thank you for joining us for this briefing. For more daily world briefs and our collection of classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com.